Okay, let's see if this works. Check, check, check. Let's see. There we go. Good, 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 good. Okay, audio is working now. So, yeah. Hello to all my queers and dears, and, welcome back to the channel. Um, yeah, so we're just doing a little stream. Haven't done a stream in a while. I'm, you know, it's it's not like a usual kind of stream. Um, Usually, I do obviously, video game streams and stuff like that. But today I just thought I would hang out with folks, and, do some sort of Q&A stuff. Oh, I think I forgot to put a link to the actual, thing in the Tumblr, post. One second. I'm trying to, uh, you know, uh, promote stuff so that, people come and see what's going on. Yeah, I forgot to put the link there. Um, oops. Oopsies. Just a second. So yeah, today we're just sort of hanging out. No, no stressful shit like the H Bomber guy stream. Um, just hanging out with you all today. Um, um, uh, Nobody's here yet, and that's fine. So I'll have to wait until people are here to ask me questions to really start the Q&A in any meaningful way. But that's okay. I've got, a few other things I'm juggling. Just trying to, um, just promoting it here and there, just to see who I can get here. Da, da, da. So we got some awesome news earlier today, in terms of uh, queerness, and Pride Month and stuff, which is a new entry in the Life is Strange series, which is really exciting. Which is, a famously extremely, queer series. It has nothing to do with, asexuality, which is what this is about. What this stream is about. But since it's also sort of about Pride Month, I just figured, it's, and no one's here to ask questions yet. I just figured I'll start out with just sort of talking about some cool Pride shit. And right now, yeah, the big thing on my mind in terms of Pride is New Life is Strange, which is really freaking cool. I did not expect, that we would have, Max Caulfield back, who was, of course, the protagonist of the very first, Life is Strange game. So that's really cool to have her back. I was always a bit, worried about the idea of bringing, a character like Max back, because there was such a demand for it that um, that like I worried about it. And, creators had been pretty clear that her story was over, you know. And I always worry about just giving in to what fans demand. Um, you know, uh, so it's really exciting that they have, uh, clearly like thought about how to um, tell another story with Max that isn't exactly a sequel to the original game, which I really appreciate. It's so yeah, anyways, that's a pride thing um that's happening. What else oh, actually, a little more relevant to sort of the Q&A thing here. Um and just sort of building off that whole thing about asexuality is, Life is Strange is one of those examples of like there's um it's such a queer series, um but there's never been, a single mention of asexuality. Like that's just not part of that world yet, which is really um really disappointing. Um um so hopefully, we'll get something else. We'll get progress on, front like that the longer Life is Strange games come out. But like there was a whole part of Life is Strange Wavelength during which was this sort of DLC for Life is Strange True Colors, and there was a whole part of it that took place during Pride Month, and asexuality was nowhere to be found. Um, um, so yep, what you gonna do? Um, I mean, I'm in the Discord server of one of the sort of main narrative designers of uh of the Life is Strange series. He has his own Discord server. Um so I actually did sort of like suggest quote no not quote unquote, but I sort of expressed a desire for, like an asexual protagonist or something like that in Life is Strange. And like so that was sort of, and that was not rejected, I mean obviously, you know there's no guarantees of any of that ever happening, but it was nice that that was like a conversation that could be had, you know um and there weren't like any questions about what asexuality was. And hopefully that means that um, they know that they know it all already, and not that they are, But I'm generally like assuming that. I mean, there's no backlash, no rejection, no concerns. It was just like, oh, that's an interesting idea, you know. And that was really cool. Um, so we'll see. Um, hopefully in the future. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if anyone's gonna come to this at all. They might be. I mean, I might be alone this whole time. So I don't know. Maybe I could think of some sort of um, it's like some frequently asked questions, or not frequently asked, but sort of like questions that make sense for people to have that I could answer. Um, let's see. Um, God, I'm trying to think. What's a let's see. Let's see. How maybe like how did I find out I'm asexual? Maybe that's a question people might have. So the answer to that is I always like knew I was a little different. Um, see, some people might think that like because asexuality is about that asexuality is sort of generally uh sort of talked about in terms of the absence of sexual attraction, right? You might think that that kind of identity can't really be felt until people are feeling sexual attraction, and so you're different. And like, yes and no. Because for a long time, I really I did know I was different in some way. Specifically, like my relationship to actually aesthetic attraction is actually not uh, particularly strong. Um, uh, Apologies. Little concerned about the YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. Hmm. Oh, hey Miranda, welcome. Is the video going okay for you? That's sort of the main concern I'm having at the moment. Is everything going okay on that front? Um, because YouTube is saying that you might be getting poor quality, and I want to make sure that you're not not getting poor quality. So and also, do you have any questions for me to start with? Since I don't have that many people here. Um, I don't know. I'm trying to. Uh, Hey, it's a bit quiet, but also my ears are partially blocked, so everything's quieter than usual. Okay. Um, got it. Okay. So, well, as long as everything else seems to be working, that's good. That works. Um, if it's telling me that the stream status is poor, but it's not actually that poor, then then I will live with that, and attempt to put my concerns aside. So let's see what other. So, oh right, I was saying, figuring out I was asexual. So, yeah, so I had this sort of odd relationship to aesthetic attraction, where, most people could sort of, uh, understand. Um, how did you? Yeah. So okay, cool, Miranda. This was actually a question I was already answering because I was trying to think of the sort of questions that people might want answered since nobody else was here at the moment. Um, so yeah, so like growing up, I always had, I did feel I was different, and I couldn't quite understand why. I always sort of phrased it. I was, as I was saying, it was an interesting relationship to aesthetic attraction, but the way I always phrased it growing up, and the way it still sort of makes the most sense to me, is this idea that like I can't quite see physical beauty in the way most people can. Like most people can look at someone and know whether they're attractive or not, right? To them personally, right? I mean, like it's like even if it's not like sexually attractive, it's like, oh, I like the way this person looks, right? A lot of aces still have aesthetic attraction. Often it's described by many aces as, being able, like, kind of like the experience of enjoying a sunset or a painting. Um, uh, and for me, I never really had even that. Um, so there were all these things that, like, as I grew up, I wasn't experiencing them the same as other people. Um, and I sort of ended up actually overcompensating for my insecurities around that and sort of started rationalizing that I was actually superior. Because I suppose it's easier than feeling inferior. But basically, I sort of started rationalizing this idea that because I could not process that kind of thing the same way, I therefore was not objectifying women, and like I could not objectify women, literally was incapable of it, and therefore was like superior in some way. But yeah, looking back, that was 100%, coping. I was insecure about being different, and so I developed a sort of false reality where this actually made me better than other people. So, I live with that my whole life of sort of trying to figure, trying to just feeling a little odd in that inability to wrap my head around something that seems so average for everyone, such an easy, comfortable thing for everyone. And then I went to college for the first time. I had to go to college 3 times before I found a place where I could actually stay. But the first time I went to college, I met a friend, or I made a friend, and they introduced me to the term asexual. I described at one point that this was the kind of thing I experienced, and they gave me the term. And sort of my initial response was like, no, I'm straight. I'm obviously straight. Um, and, and it's interesting because it wasn't, like, obviously that's a response a lot of queer people have to something, is that kind of rejection of the idea that they could be queer just because of, various forms of queerphobia in society. It's, but for me, I was also wrestling with this complex reality of I still fall in love with women. I still desire a romantic relationship with them. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these things that people sort of classified as straight, as far as I was aware. Um, and so the idea that I was anything but was anxiety producing. Um, and it didn't really make sense because what else could I be? But eventually, I did start looking into the idea of asexuality, and it did click with me, and so here I am, all these years later. Um, uh, it was an interesting experience and an interesting journey. Um, and I think to me, one of the things that is interesting, as going back a little bit, was that thing of like, I knew I wasn't like other people long before, like, I felt like I was quote unquote supposed to be feeling sexual attraction specifically. Like, I did not have to enter a phase of my life where sex was an active discussion topic exactly, to know that I wasn't operating quite the same as a lot of the people around me. And I think that's always, I think that because asexuality is tied to sexual attraction specifically, it's sometimes easier for people to dismiss it as something that can't or even shouldn't be something talked about to young children, or like represented in kids media or anything like that. And That's something I've sort of been thinking a lot about, actually, is sort of like, how do you do that? Because, obviously the assumption is you have to talk about sex to talk about asexuality, and I'm not 100% sure that's the case. So, that's a conversation for potentially a different time, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot. Um, I hope that was interesting. um, any other questions? You know, yeah, any other questions? I just turned off subscribers only. But if you are here and you're watching, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe. Because, well, means a lot, basically, and I'm hoping to, transform this into something a little more, sustainable and stuff like that. Which I haven't done yet. Um, uh, Also, I have not been able to figure out how to get the YouTube chat into uh, the chat box. Ah, here we go. Okay, two good questions. Here we go. You said what I hear in queer stories. I always knew I was different. For you, is there something specific, or is it just like vibes? Um, it's a little bit of both. Um, it's it's knowing that you have a different relationship to things than other people. At least in my experience, like I was interacting with the world in a way that was different from other people. And even long before I had the words for any of that, it was clear to me that my experiences were not the same. Um, so I hope that that's a good answer. It's a little hard to put words to, but that is ultimately pretty much the answer I have. Um, Exalted. Did learning about what asexuality was matter to you outside of clarification for relationships you might have engaged in? Absolutely. This actually builds directly on what Miranda just asked about, which um, really is this thing that you're certainly in my experience, right? Being ace isn't just about the relationships I have. It's about my interaction with the world. It's a lens through which to explore the ways that I interact with the world and that the world interacts with me. Um, Specifically, there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of concepts that the aspec community, and aspec is not just the asexual community or the asexual spectrum. It's short for the asexual and aromantic spectrum, which is a whole thing. But in the aspec community, basically aromantic and asexual people tend to be in community with each other. But we are not the same, to be clear. Aromanticism and asexuality are two separate identities that can coexist and that sort of exist on a similar spectrum, but that aren't the same, to be clear. So, anyways, but going back to the question, um, it really is it is this relationship to the world, and so the aspec community has developed concepts for some pillars of oppression that many other people can't really see or understand the same way, and those are the terms amatonormativity and allonormativity. Um, and allonormativity is this sort of belief that everyone wants sex, that is a universal desire, and that everyone, specifically, not just that everyone wants sex, but that everyone feels sexual attraction, that every single person feels that and has a similar desire um, within them. And amatonormativity is the same, but for romance. And it creates these expectations and these sort of destructive boxes, like any other pillar of oppression. But it's not as easy for people outside of the aspec community to see. Um, but knowing your knowing I was ace also allows me to understand my relationship to sex scenes in films or games or whatever, or like why I feel the way I do about certain topics, or it's not just an identity, it's a lens through which to look at the world, if that makes sense. I hope that answered your question, Out Exalted. Um, any other questions for anyone? But from anyone, rather. Or Out Exalted, if that didn't answer your question or you have a follow up, please ask away. I am, uh, you know, yeah. Um, uh, there's a lot of awesome stuff that comes with being asexual, even as there's a lot of difficult stuff. Um, I'm glad. I'm glad it does. Thank you. Or you're welcome, or whatever the hell I'm supposed to be saying there. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting and really compelling and beautiful stuff that comes with being ace, alongside the challenges of exploring society that doesn't quite get you. Um, One of my favorite things about the aspec community is how we interact with labels. Um, there's still a lot of gatekeeping. Let me be upfront about that, and it's really bad, and we need to solve that problem. But there is a general sort of theory of labels that I really love, and that I think we should really adopt on a wider scale in society, which is this sort of like this idea that sort of labels are like a starting point, right? Basically, asexual is it's an umbrella term. Uh, it's a spectrum. That's and and in terms of a spectrum, it doesn't mean like more or less asexual. It just means there's all these different ways to be asexual. And so what's kind of cool about the way we look at these things, the way we look at the label of asexual, is that, or aromantic, as the case may be, is that it's the starting point of the conversation. We do have potentially too many micro labels, but at the same time, I think the idea of having these micro labels that allow us to specify really unique experiences even within the asexual community allows us to be a lot more open and flexible with our ideas of identity. Um, and like for instance, right, I am a heteroromantic, touch favorable, sex averse, asexual man. And like that's a lot of qualifiers, and that's a lot of like words, but at the same time, that is a way for me to describe myself within the asexual community, that allows me to have a more concrete idea of myself and of my own identity. Um, and so it's not this binary idea of are you asexual or are you not, but instead this umbrella that allows you to explore what asexuality means to you personally. And I really think that that's the direction labels need to go in society. Is this umbrella thing, where a label is a starting point for a bigger conversation about who you are and what that label means to you. So, yeah. Wasn't a question that was asked, but it was something that I felt was worth talking about a little bit. Um, so, any other questions? Any other anything? I'm planning to sort of stay on here for a while, so you know, um, I don't know exactly how long, but weird concern I might have is when understanding other people's experiences in relation to your own. Like maybe you are muddling a more pure understanding of your own experiences by going beyond. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, please? I'm not entirely clear on what you're trying to say. Sorry, I guess there's a big delay between us, so. It was kind of answering about the stuff about labels being simply a starting point. Oh, okay. What are some things that didn't click until you figured out you were ace? Could be in your own life, could be a society, anything like, oh, that's why. Yeah. So, there were definitely a bunch of things. Um, I mean, obviously there was the big thing of just like, I can't really process what it means to be physically attractive, right? My brain can't quite wrap itself around that concept. So that was a big thing. That was like, um, oh, that's that's why I don't understand that. Um, but there's also other stuff too, for sure, about um, like I think I think a lot of it ends up being sort of the things you don't understand. Like, and you are able to realize what you don't understand and why. And I think for me, there were a lot of things that didn't make sense. Um, and I could never understand why they didn't make sense to me. Um, so, obviously the physical attraction was one. I have never understood the term hot and like what that means for someone to be hot. Um, I guess this isn't quite answering your question. Um, because you're sort of asking me things that clicked when I realized I was ace, and I'm sort of answering like about the how the main things that clicked were why I didn't understand things. So I don't really know if that's answering your question in any way. Um Actually there is one thing actually. Which was I understood my relationship to masculinity a little bit better. Um, I've always been a very sensitive person. I've always been, a very open and emotional person. And obviously, not all of that comes from my asexuality. But one of the things that I did realize at some point um, was like that I had a little bit of like I started out with a little bit of distance from a few core pillars of toxic masculinity, basically, which of course a lot of that is sexual dominance. Um, so I sort of started out with this little bit of distance, and I think that has been really interesting to explore. And I didn't necessarily realize this immediately after after realizing I was ace, but I think that it was always there a little bit. And in recent years, when I've done a little more processing, I very much have thought a lot about how this gave me a little bit of distance from certain ideas of masculinity that are very toxic. Um, and how that sort of got me on the track a little bit of questioning some of that stuff, you know? Um, yeah, so I mean, it clicked why stuff wasn't clicking, so that counts. Okay, I'm glad. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff in that vein. There was the physical attractiveness thing. There was, um, let me think. There was, no, that was the main one. But now I'm trying to think of other examples because I feel like there were other examples. Uh, I definitely, I think I came to understand a little bit more. Uh, why some things weren't appealing to me. Um, like, I've always been a very romantic soul. I've loved the idea of, romance and all that stuff. Um, but, like, it, I think, is very much, it never included any of that kind of other stuff. And yeah, like, and I think that was definitely interesting. Um, there's also like some interesting ideas of like people being attracted to fictional characters was a big thing that like I never quite was able to wrap my mind around. Um, uh, having like a fictional crush of some kind or finding a fictional character hot or whatever, and like definitely knowing I'm asexual helped me understand a little bit more why I didn't click with that idea. I've never had a fictional crush, and I really don't understand what that is or what that feels like. And I could sort of understand how that comes from the way my personal asexuality exhibits itself. Um, but yeah, yeah. I don't know. I hope that that's a little interesting for you, Miranda. In terms of the question that you asked. Um, yep. Um, is there anything that's unintentionally funny in society due to the normative assumption stuff? Yes. Um, cheating. Cheating is so absurd. It is the dumbest shit imaginable to me. Um, it makes people act the like lust in general. Not just cheating, but lust is such a stupid thing. It's so funny to me. There's no like people act so weirdly out of lust, and whenever I see like a fictional character who's like like acting out of lust, and they're like and it's just like, oh my god, you're so stupid. You're so stupid. Why are you acting in this way? Because I can't like wrap my mind around like why someone would feel like such a magnetic pull to something so dumb. um so that's a very funny thing. I mean, obviously it's not funny to anyone who experiences it. I don't mean to cheapen that, but specifically like with like fictional characters, I just get so, it's so funny to me to see people not being able to just be like, this is not a smart thing to do. um uh so that's a big one that's definitely funny. Also like a bunch of a bunch of the sort of like a bunch of ads, actually. A bunch of ads are very funny because a lot of them try to appeal to someone through sex appeal. And so for me, it's like, this is so dumb. Why would anyone care about this? Um, I could see the humor in the less not cheating, even as a hetero. If y'all didn't have to deal with acephobia slash heteronormativity, y'all be so powerful. Yeah, yeah. um, no, I mean but it's all just Um, I do think that there is a lot of reasons to listen to our experiences. I don't know if like powerful is quite the word, but I think there's a lot of reasons to listen to our experiences. Um, yeah, and I think you're right. I think it's better to say like lust is the one that's very funny about sort of the irrationality, not the cheating. And I apologize for framing that poorly. Um, but yeah, um, but yeah, the other one is very much like ads and stuff like that, and sort of just the general idea of like manipulation through sexuality. So like femme fatales are really weird to me. For example, uh, they're just really freaking weird to me. Because I'm like, this would make me so uncomfortable. There would be no appeal whatsoever. I could like, doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah, so that's a big one. Uh, Obviously, like there's a long history of female characters weaponizing sexuality um to manipulate men in some way in like a bunch in fictional stories. um and that always amuses me a little bit because it makes no sense to me. um so yeah. That's I think that's my answer for that one. I think sort of lust is a big one that's just very funny in the way that it gets people to act in ways that go directly against their best interests. There is no value in any of this whatsoever except like the sort of immediate satisfaction or whatever. And to me, it's just very funny to see people acting in ways that are so foolish, in my frank opinion. Um, so yeah. Um, Trying to think of male version of femme fatales, but the tropes are so presumptive that men are animalistic and women are demi. No, it doesn't go the other way. Yeah, so generally, yeah. So yeah, gender norms are. I hate gender norms so much. I hate them so much. Um, so much. And yeah. I think you're right. There just isn't the idea of like when men weaponize sexuality. It's generally framed in a very cruel and and controlling way, right? Um, Femme fatales are not like they're seen as dangerous, but not necessarily cruel. I think, and like the idea of control for a woman is like through like emotions, I think, and through feelings, whereas the idea of a man exhibiting control over someone generally tends to be framed through force, you know. um and that's sort of, I think, what you're talking about here, that men are animalistic. if they are a threat in any sexual way, or if they're trying to get something through sexual favors and stuff like that, they're usually depicted as forcing something rather than through manipulation, um, which is yeah. It sort of does fall into these very gendered ideas of men and women, that men are bigger and stronger and angrier and all of this stuff. So if they want to control someone, they'll just force it. And women are backstabbing and emotional and tuned into sensitive topics and care about clothes and all of this stuff. So that's how they manipulate people, and that's how they get what they want. It's interesting how even just depictions of people as bad people still get gendered. Like being a bad person, manipulating people, trying to get what you want from them in a duplicitous way, even that ends up being gendered, which is just really interesting and kind of disturbing. Because you'd think that there'd be some kind of general standard morality of some kind in terms of what actually makes a person not a good person. But when it comes to, fictional depictions in particular, you really end up sort of getting this very gendered idea of these are the ways men can be bad and these are the ways women can be bad. If that makes any sense. Maybe I'm not making a lot of sense here. I'm not sure. Evil mask and evil femme. Yes, I'm just gonna memify all the things. That's fair. If it works, it works. Love the meme you shared, by the way, in my Discord server, which I should put um, a link to in the chat, probably, for those who want to join. Da, 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 da. Um, Here we go. Create invite and send for anyone who wants to join us there. It's a great community. Very proud of it. I think there might be an intersection between evil mask and evil femme and queer coding. Like, what if a woman is evil mask or man is evil femme? And that's a way to queer code them, maybe. Yeah, I would say that's probably a thing. I think I'd have to think more about specific examples. But yeah, although I think that there's a complication, right? Because yeah, no, there's a complication. I think in particular, it's it's harder to find, an effeminate man bad guy that is that falls into similar categories as as evil female characters. Like, one of the things I'm thinking of right now is Scar, right? He is queer coded, very much so. Doing the the hand stuff and all that kind of stuff. And like he does manipulation and stuff like that, but he's also very much tied into uses of force. Um, so like that's kind of what I'm thinking of, is like queer coded men. I think it's because I would think it's probably because effeminate men are generally laughed at. And so the idea of making them a villain in some way is not really a thing because they're considered pathetic. Um, uh, Whereas when it comes to, like a particularly, muscular, big woman, I think that we have seen examples of those characters being uh, a threat in the same way that masculine characters have been. Um, I absolutely think that we've seen that a lot, actually. So that's an interesting double standard there. Um, um, let's see. Other questions about my experiences. There was some stuff I actually wanted to talk about a little bit that I don't know if I'll get questions about, but I did want to talk about some stuff, which was my experiences with the wider queer community and with Pride Month and stuff like that. Um, I really want to talk about those experiences because I think they're really important. One of the things that I've thought a lot about is, the fact that Pride is always very crowded and very loud, right? Like their marches, they're loud and crowded and lots of people, and like the idea of a Pride celebration that is, let's say, a little more accessible to an autistic person who has sensory issues, like myself, is not really talked about a whole lot. Accessibility at Pride is a wider issue, if we're being frank. But certainly, in my experience, something I really haven't seen a lot about is the idea of creating a space for people who are overwhelmed by large crowds. Um, I don't feel comfortable with the idea of going to a pride parade, but there's not, like, the idea of getting together with your queer community during Pride tends to be very focused on that. Um, and then there's the issue of never quite knowing from the ASPEC community perspective rather than their divergent perspective, never quite knowing if the Pride you're going to will think about you at all. Um, we're still sort of in a transition period where the queer community is learning about is learning to include the ASPEC community, and so it's still sort of a bit of a roll of the dice in terms of whether or not a queer space will accept you as legitimate. Also, hello, Savage Gato? Can I call you just Gato? Hello. Welcome. Um, Welcome. Do you have any questions for me? Now that you're here, since this is a Q&A stream, I would love to hear anything you're curious about. Um, think ceviche. Oh, ceviche. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I've heard of that. I haven't eaten it, but I've heard of it. So yeah, that makes some sense. Um, uh, yeah, that makes some sense. Um, uh, well, Ceviche Gato is potentially considering questions. Are there any others from anyone else? Um, Let me think if there's anything I want to talk about in particular, like the one I was just talking about. Because I do think that those are important things to talk about, the idea of making sure that pride is something everyone can participate in, you know? Um, what do you want people to know about asexuality and or asexual people? That is, a great question. And I think the big thing I want people to know is that we're not a monolith. Um, this goes back to what I was saying about how we talk about labels, where um, the label that we choose is the start of the conversation, and so that's a big thing, is to recognize that. Another thing I think would be for people to understand more that, like, it's funny to say this on a Q&A stream, but that the questions you can ask us aren't, like, different than the ones you can ask other people. Um, a lot of aces have gotten questions like, "Do you masturbate?" And, like, if you wouldn't ask that to an allosexual, then don't, which is the name for people who are not ace, just to be clear, then you shouldn't ask it to an asexual person. That's an incredibly invasive question. And those kinds of invasive questions are unfortunately quite common for asexual people, and sort of framed under this whole thing of, I'm just trying to understand. And, like, I'm great. I'm glad you're trying to understand, but also that's a really invasive question, and you have no right to know that about me. You know. Um. Um. So that's another one, is to just, like, think of us within that thing of, like, you. No matter how much you want to understand, quote unquote, like, we still deserve the same amount of privacy, trans people, of course, have had to deal with this a lot as well, in terms of often, like, people asking, like, very invasive questions about their bodies, um, under this idea of trying to understand, but instead just being made to feel incredibly uncomfortable because the questions are about, like, their genitals and stuff. Like, that's not reasonable. You can't do that. Um, so that's another one I think that is really important to talk about, and that I want people to understand. Um, yeah, so yeah, the first one is really that, every asexual person is. We have our own relationships to our asexuality. Um, uh, and we all deserve to have our own experiences respected rather than lumped in with other people. Um, Uh, Also, I won't want people to know that asexuality is what the A is for in LGBTQIA. Well, technically, the A is for asexuality, aromanticism, and agender. Um, so it's actually a very important part of LGBTQIA. Um, uh, it is not, as some people think, still somehow for ally. Allies are not part of LGBTQIA. Um, uh, the thing is, that actually, this has been a big issue that not enough people have been talking about, which is that the Biden administration, whenever they talk about the queer community, has basically been putting out something that says LGBTQI plus. And like, are the rest of us technically covered under the plus? Yeah, but it's also very odd to leave the A out so explicitly and so consistently. It feels almost like intentional exclusion, but I have no idea why the A keeps getting left out. Maybe it's because they think it's for ally, and so they think they're being respectful by leaving it out. I don't know. But it's very offensive, quite frankly. It makes me quite unhappy to have that keep being left out with the White House's correspondence about queer people. And the last thing I would say that I want people to know about asexuality and or asexual people is that it and I mentioned this earlier, but is that it and aromanticism are two separate identities. They are not the same thing. If someone is aromantic, they are not necessarily asexual. If someone is asexual, they are not necessarily aromantic. Um, uh, like, aromanticism is not somewhere on the asexual spectrum, as it is often sort of framed as. It is its own thing. There are many aro aces, but there are also, romantic aces, like myself, and these people are often really excluded from the conversation. There are sexual aromantics. There are allosexual aromantics. And yeah. One way I can remember how the A doesn't mean ally is like community is like a sports team where allies are like cheerleaders or fans. I don't know if I agree with that, but if it helps you, then I'm glad. But I think thinking about the queer community as a sports team is not super helpful. Um, I think I would also say that just on a personal level, I think cheerleaders actually do deserve to be treated as more part of the team. They're putting in tons of work to support the team. Like, they're not just hanging out in the sidelines. They're putting in a lot of work. I think they should be considered part of the team. But that's a different conversation. Let's see. What would you say to someone who thinks they might be ace of some sort, but they're not sure? I would say try the label on and see how it feels. And if it feels right, great. And if it doesn't, that's no problem. Um, and and what's more is that it could feel right today and not tomorrow. It could feel right this week and not next year, and that's all okay. You know, um, it's really you're not an imposter. You're not invading a community. You're not any of that stuff. And if anyone gatekeeps you, screw them. Um, you know, that is what I would say to anyone who thinks they're ace. You know, welcome to the community. Um, and if they're not sure, that's okay too. You know, there's some great resources out there to help people figure themselves out. Uh, and um, and I have actually sent those resources to some people who were sort of trying to figure out whether or not they were A spec, and those people have actually they sort of haven't decided yet. They haven't figured it out, but they're like other identities that and other experiences that that those people have had that actually come to be like a little more clear about like they actually have a lot in common with the A-spec experience or with many A-spec experiences. Um, and so like that was really interesting to sort of explore is that you know if you know if you have experiences that are similar to the A-spec experience and you feel like that you might be ace, but then it turns out that ultimately like you still are sort of you have a lot of similar experiences but you don't quite click with the label. That's fine too, you know. And you don't have to choose a label either. You don't need something. You just basically what everything about this community is it's there as a resource for people to help understand themselves and find people who understand them. And so yeah, I think that's my response to that is all that. You know, give yourself room, give yourself grace, let your explore the different kinds of asexuality and see if any of them click with you, and if they don't, that's okay. And if they do now and they don't later, that's also okay. And if they don't now and they do later, that's also okay. You know? Related, and to clarify the previous thing, sometimes I try to reflect on experiences I've had through other people's experiences to understand myself, and I worry I am losing something by not being able to find those conclusions on my own. I see. Um, no. I would say that that you're not really losing anything. We all exist within a wider context, right? Um, and and we sort of we are also humanity is a very social species. Um, so I think they're the looking to see if other people had similar experiences is a very natural thing to do. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. And I would also say that even if you don't I think that if you're not willing to accept that you have unique experiences and that those are okay, that can be a little bad. Not in terms of like you being, but just like it can be a little unhealthy. Um, uh, so like it's important to be able to recognize the validity of your own personal unique experiences. But I think that certainly as like a starting point, looking for similar experiences and seeing what those people did and how those people lived and all those things is absolutely valid and totally normal. And you're not losing anything through simply exploring your own identity through the people who seem like they're in your community or that you feel like you might be in theirs. That's the strength of community, is being able to help people be their authentic selves, if that makes sense. I want to check something. I'm glad that that helped. I'm really glad. Um, oh, good. Looks like at some point the stream went back to being actually pretty decent quality. So, oh, okay. What to you is the most fun thing about A, being asexual, B, the queer community, C, pride? Um, Fun. I guess I have a hard time thinking about like the most fun thing. I find a lot of beauty in these things. Not necessarily fun, I guess. Um, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I could describe it as fun, but I find so much beauty in those things. Like, in terms of being asexual, I love the way we look at labels. Like I said, that's a really beautiful thing for me. And I love the lens through which we can explore the world. That's a really beautiful thing for me. Um, this it's a very radical and unique way of understanding human relationships, which I think is just very beautiful. That the ace and arrow community have been able to sort of develop a little bit together. Um, uh, in terms of the wider queer community, I just love how the queer community makes us think about humanity. Um, it's such a vast concept, humanity. You know, there's so many beautiful ways to be human. I love that personally. I find that incredibly beautiful. The variety of ways to be human. Um, and they make us think about ourselves and who we are and what we want and what it means to be happy and all these things. I find that incredibly beautiful. And in terms of pride in particular, um honestly, I have mixed feelings about Pride, not because I think it's a bad thing in any way whatsoever, but simply because I don't personally have a lot of experiencing being part of Pride in any particularly deep sense. In a lot of ways, because of the things I was talking about earlier, about how, there aren't really spaces for Pride that are particularly friendly to someone who gets overwhelmed by lots of noise and by crowds and stuff like that. At least not that I've seen. Um, I have a hard time figuring out sort of Pride specifically, what I really value about it, just because I just haven't been able to, I guess, explore my feelings on it the way I would like, um, just because of those limitations. But I do think, you know, uh, there is a tremendous amount of beauty in Pride, and I love that, you know, that I love that it happens every year. You know, no matter how bad the world is getting for LGBTQ people, it is something that people find joy in and community in, and that they come together and you know they and they say we are human and we love each other. I think that is beautiful. There obviously is, there are issues about gatekeeping and stuff like that, and questions about who belongs at Pride, and all sorts of stuff, and that's never fun. But in general, I think that the outpouring of community that comes with Pride Month, I think, is always very beautiful, and I do support that greatly, even if I've never really been able to explore it for myself. Which does actually connect a little bit to a conversation about, what it means to be queer, um, um, which I think is a difficult conversation, um, that often, you know, um, uh, aspec people get brought into that in some way, and but like, so for me, I've often sort of had this very challenging imposter syndrome about my own queerness, um, because in a lot of ways, I am, sort of indistinguishable from a straight person. Um, but then I'm not. I'm not indistinguishable from a straight person. There are some very very clear differences. Um, but sort of there's this voice in my head that sometimes makes me think that, like, I'm not straight enough to be straight, and I'm not queer enough to be queer, And it can be hard to sort of, you know, recognize the validity of your experiences, as part of that community. Um, uh, yeah, and so for me, I think I've often wrestled with my own sense of queerness. I am queer, but sometimes it doesn't feel right to call myself that, if that makes sense. And I think that the queer community as a whole could get a little better at um, at inclusiveness. Um, because I think a lot of stuff ends up being sort of guided by trauma, like worries about, you know, movements being, dragged backwards by people who aren't part of our community, and like stuff like that. And or allies calling themselves part of our community when they're really not. They just sort of, I mean, it's like, the A being for ally, right? It's like, it's just, that's not that's not how, um but there is a whole issue very much of, defining ourselves by oppression, right? Asexual people are depressed the same way, so they're not part of our community. That's been a big thing of like, of defining queerness through oppression. And asexual people aren't oppressed the way other queer people are. We don't have legislation against us, stuff like that. And so that can sometimes be warped, uh, um, into a form of exclusion. But that is also, being done in a way that harms the wider queer community, because it's defining queerness not by personal identity, or by community, but by suffering. And that's definitely not healthy for the wider queer community. Um, I hate Oppression Olympics. That's a whole thing about, like, who deserves attention, um, uh, you know, and basically deciding, who deserves attention by, debating who has suffered the most, which I'm very much not a fan of. I hope that was an interesting answer, Miranda. Apologies, it went on a bit long and I went on some tangents. And I also didn't necessarily directly answer your question about the most fun thing. In my privileged perspective, what makes one queer is being outside the assumed default. Like society TM implies you're either queer or you're numble. Numble. You're either queer or you're normal. And yeah, um, I think that that's um, pretty much right. If you are not, if you are not within the box that society has determined as the way, sexuality and romance and, and all these different things are quote unquote supposed to work, then you're queer. You know. Um, Also, you love tangents. That's very good to hear because I do them a lot. I have a lot of thoughts, and they all tend to come out. It's very hard for my thoughts to not come out of my mouth. Um, Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you are, um, uh, and how much you like tangents. So, forgot where I read it, but someone was poking fun at anti-diverse people by being like the two genders, male and political, the two sexualities, straight and political, the two races, white and political. Yeah. Oh man, that's some good roasting. That's very true. Um yeah. um yeah. That's all I got to say. Yeah. Um, so let's see. Hmm. I might wrap up. Um, in a few minutes. I got a few minutes more. Don't worry. So like I can answer one or two more questions. But I'm thinking of we've been doing this for about an hour and 40 minutes almost. So, and we haven't had that many new people stop by. So, I'd like to, and I might do another one of these during the month, if people are interested, and just try to find maybe some more people to come and enjoy it. Um, but we'll see. But yeah, I just figured since we're already at nearly an hour and 40 minutes that I should probably, it's 10:40 p.m. here, so yeah, I should probably think about sort of heading towards a wrap up thing. So, do people have like one or two more questions for me that I can answer before doing that? Best ace memes? Hmm. Damn. Uh, Jeez. I'm not sure. There are some great ones out there. Like some really great ones. Um, I'm obviously generally a fan of a lot of stuff with with cake and garlic bread. Those are the classic ones. You know. Um, those are the classics. Uh, but there's so many of them, and yeah, I would have a hard time telling you which ones are the best. I would have a hard time. There's some great ace memes out there. There's whole Facebook groups full of them, and most of them are really good. Um, a lot of them end up being about in some capacity the absurdity of allonormative culture. Um, uh, and our complete inability to understand it. Um, and those are always fun. Anything else before we wrap up? Okay, I figure I'll wrap up there then. Um, Thank you so much for the people who were here, and I really appreciated doing this. It was fun. I know that there weren't a whole lot of people here because I'm still pretty small as a creator, but it meant a lot to have a few people here, and I hope some people end up watching the VOD and enjoying the things I had to say here. Um, I may or may not do another one of these, but even if I don't, this was really nice, and I'm glad I got to talk about some things that were, important to me, and there were some great questions tonight. So thank you so much to the people who were here, and if you're watching the VOD, thank you for watching the VOD, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. I will see you all very soon for a video essay that I'm working on. Will hopefully come out in a few weeks' time. And there's another video essay that is finished that will be coming out relatively soon, I think. Timing it with some other stuff. So, thank you so much, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.